This is the UK Tonight with a special programme on the state of policing in Britain. Exclusive polling for Sky News, the first study of its kind, reveals the extent of public concern, the experiences of victims and even what police officers think. The findings paint a grim picture. Too many criminals getting away with it, too many victims denied justice, and a belief that police simply won't investigate the everyday crimes that are a blight on communities. As well as victims, we've been given rare access to hundreds of serving police officers who say they feel undervalued by the public and unsupported by the government. I'll be speaking to the Policing Minister, as well as the Chair of the National Police Chiefs Council. And we'll discuss the culture on the force, the subject of so much debate and controversy in recent years. Our poll suggesting only a small minority of police staff believe there is truly a problem, and almost half say officers are being persecuted for banter. Victims are not reporting crimes in the UK because they don't believe the police will do anything about them. That is the damning finding of an exclusive poll on the state of policing carried out for Sky News by YouGov. We've been hearing from victims, the wider public and, unusually, serving members of the police. And the results suggest the public doesn't trust the police to deal with the everyday crimes that make life miserable. And officers feel undervalued by the public and unsupported by the government. Coming up, I'm going to be speaking to the Policing Minister to hear what she's doing to tackle the perceptions and the problems, as well as one of the most senior police officers in the country for his reaction to our findings. But first, our Home Editor, Jason Farrell, has this report.
But the shoplifting is terrible.
I've had my purse stolen from my car.
I've had someone pull a knife on me outside the shop.
Could you ever feel like you're putting yourself at risk?
In a way, yes. This comes with a job as well, but this is what I've signed up for.
People feel that crime is rising and that too often criminals get away with it. In the first survey of its kind, a national YouGov poll for Sky News reveals public concerns about how crime is policed, the experiences of victims, but it also asks what police officers think themselves. The public is mostly confident the police investigate major crimes such as violence and sexual offences. But confidence plummets to just 14% when it comes to lesser crimes like shoplifting. They mostly trust ordinary police officers, but have less faith in their bosses.
Hello, UK Kev? You guys all right? OK, mind your language. We shouldn't be saying that.
There's a sense in this survey and in the street that things are going wrong.
It's all right, no worries.
But you don't mind that if someone just uses foul language?
No.
Yeah.
No, because I know him for years and I have that relationship with him. I know he's not in a good mood. So it is what it is. And
PC Roshni Thapar has been an officer in Swindon for 4 years.
And I guess
And what's your relationship like with the public generally?
It's really good. Hello, UK. Good. At times, you will always have someone who will speak negatively about the police, or maybe they've had bad experience with the police before.
Our national survey finds victims of crime are generally less positive about police and the criminal justice system. Only 40% of those who reported a crime were satisfied with the police handling, compared to 50% dissatisfied. Of those who didn't report a crime, the most common reason was that it wouldn't be investigated. Havelock Street in Swindon is like any street in any town centre in Britain, and like many shop owners, they feel under siege. Cobbler Vince has set up what he calls Meerkat.
So this is just up the road, 3-4 doors up.
Right. A shopkeepers' alliance to quickly share information on thieves in the area.
And there he is.
Same guy. How many times has your shop been broken into?
6 times we've been broken into. We've caught 2 of them. We're looking for support from the police to help and guide us because some of them are violent.
Is the police fit for purpose?
I think so, but I think people look at the police in a different way now in respect of the respect's not there. The uniform's not respected like it used to be.
The shop next door has had similar experiences.
honestly, we need more funding, more policing. The minute you barely see anybody on the street, and when you do, it's like, oh, look at that! I can see them. That's amazing, you know. Yeah. And it is like, oh, it's a miracle. Yeah.
And concern that crime is being neglected is shared by punters on the high street.
Would you report a crime to the police?
Oh, 100%. I feel like they'll pick up the phone, OK, yeah, we'll do it, and then, but just because I reported it doesn't mean that it's actually going to be escalated any further.
I've had my purse stolen from my car.
Yeah. Did you report it to the police?
Yes. Maybe they could have done more because there probably was footage, but they didn't take it much further.
Oh, look, there's the police.
Oh, look, you can ask them.
Yeah, there you go.
OK, perfect.
We did indeed. The neighbourhood policing team here in Swindon say they take all crimes seriously. Acting Inspector Winter has been in policing nearly 20 years.
I try and push my officers to be out on foot patrol as much as possible. Whatever crime's being committed, no crime is too small, because we need to, sometimes when you take care of the lower level crime, it stops some of the bigger crime. I don't think lower level crime is the right terminology, really, but they're all equally as important to the individual that suffered them. So.
In the survey, police officers agree with a strong public feeling that they spend too little time in the community.
Would you like to be able to spend more time on the beat?
Of course.
Yeah.
1000%. Every single day. If I was not tied up with the paperworks, then I would absolutely, and which I do anyways.
Do you think there's too much paperwork?
Yeah.
I mean, come on, most police officers do think that.
Yes,
yeah.
I do believe we are tight. And again, this is where I guess the frustration is built within the community that, you know, maybe we're not out in the jobs or in the beat that often.
Yeah.
84% of those working in the police are proud of their job, but just 29% feel appreciated by the public. 82% believe the public have an inaccurate perception of what they do, largely because of the media. At Scotland Yard, a senior commander at the Metropolitan Police gave me his take on it.
What is it that the public, do you think, don't get about policing?
You know, we don't like bullies. You know, we are there to bring to justice those who, commit crime and cause problems within our society. So hopefully the vast majority of police officers and police staff are people like myself, you know, genuine public servants who want to do the best for our communities.
And passionate about what you're doing.
Absolutely.
I'm guessing.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been a police officer, like say, 38 years, still very proud to be a police officer.
What about police culture? Well, this is really interesting because if you ask the public, most people believe that police forces are failing to get to grips with homophobia and racism. But if you ask officers themselves, the vast majority feel it is not a problem. Fewer than a third believe that sexism is a problem, although that does go up by more than 10% if you ask female officers.
Maybe with the other force, yes, it might be a problem, or maybe it does exist in our force as well, but I have not experienced that myself.
Many crimes are falling, but overwhelmingly police officers feel under-resourced, and victims' experiences support the general sense of despair that too often crime goes unpunished. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, let's look a bit closer at those numbers, shall we? Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, can walk us through the results of our poll. The first time data has been collected from both victims and the police.
Is there a crisis of legitimacy around our law and order system? Exclusively for Sky News, YouGov has surveyed both the victims of crime and police officers and staff, as well as the public at large. So unusual to get all three together to paint a picture. Let's start with the victims, because we can reveal what actually happens to them. Now look at this. Over a third of crimes go unreported to police, according to victims. They told us the biggest reason is that they just didn't think the police would do anything if they did report the crime. But for those that did, we now know what happened next. And look at this. The biggest number you can see on the screen is of victims who were given a crime number and then nothing happened. The second biggest category is for those whose crime was investigated, but the case was closed unresolved. And you can understand how deeply frustrating victims must feel at the criminal justice system, but we can quantify that now. Look at this. This is amongst those who say the police actively investigated their crime, and by a margin of 2/3 to 1/3, they are dissatisfied. By the way, a majority of these people thought that the police should and could have done more. So let's look at the attitudes to the police amongst the public as a whole. And you can see just how low trust is. Just 25% trust the police to reduce crime against 61% who say that they are bad. So what's going wrong inside the police? Well, we asked them, and we can see in our poll of police officers and police staff what the problem is. And you can see most of them say that it's underfunding and understaffing. But look at the bottom here, because this is where the real alarm bells start to ring. And it's quite a bleak picture. There's lots of evidence of antagonism towards senior officers, which the rank and file suggest are doing a bad job. So with that finding, we thought we'd ask some additional questions about police culture. Look at this. 51% of people who work in the police say they have experienced or seen bullying. Now look at this. 42% of people who work in the police say they have experienced or seen sexism or misogyny. We've got another finding. Twice as many female police officers and staff think sexism is a problem compared to men. Such a big gap. But only a tiny proportion think that there's a cultural problem, really acknowledge that there is an issue. Right, look at this. 15% think that there is a real issue with offensive attitudes and language in the police. But by far the biggest number, 55%, think that officers are just being persecuted for banter and humour. That's how they see it. Victims and the police and the public aren't happy with the service as it stands. But this unique glimpse inside our police force gives us quite a big warning sign about the internal culture. Maybe it's not as simple as simply giving them more resources.
Well, this poll has really delivered a unique insight, a lot of information there. I've been speaking to the Policing and Crime Minister, Sarah Jones, about her plans to tackle the issues that we've highlighted there. And she revealed that her own family's experience of everyday crime mirrors that of the people polled. I began by asking her for her take on the current state of policing.
I think the police, who do a brilliant job, have a very difficult time at the moment. We know that neighbourhood policing was decimated by the last government, and we have a commitment to put back 13,000 police in our neighbourhoods so they can tackle those kinds of crimes. But we also, because of the way that policing has been funded, have seen police increasingly doing desk jobs that they shouldn't be doing and spending a huge amount of time on bureaucracy because we haven't invested in new technology.
Crime in itself underreported because people simply don't believe that the police will even show up, never mind investigate it or reach a satisfactory outcome. Would you admit that this isn't just a perception, the public have got it right?
Absolutely, and that's why we are introducing the biggest reform to policing in 200 years. We know, we all have personal experiences of this, or our families or our friends, where we've reported a crime and the response hasn't been what we want, and also it's not been followed up. We haven't been communicated with as the investigation is underway, and we want to change that. That means more police in our neighbourhoods being able to respond to it. It means more time for them to do the tackling of the crime rather than the bureaucracy, and it means supporting them and having targets as well. So making sure it's really clear, every single ward you need a named neighbourhood officer who you can contact, the response times, the 999 response times, the response to other everyday crime. We're going to measure and monitor all of that to make sure all the resources of policing are being put in to where the public want to see change.
How much time are you spending with frontline police? In your position as a minister, when was the last time you were with a police force anywhere in the country, talking to those officers on the front line, seeing what they're doing? How much dialogue is there? When was the last time you were in front of a regular Bobby on the beat, as we say?
Well, just a few days ago, I went out on a raid with some police officers in Wiltshire and talked to all of them. There were some specials there as well. We want to increase the number of police specials, which is an incredible role and a huge resource that we have in the country. And I obviously talk to all the officers there. I talk to officers all the time, as much as I can, from the very senior to the very junior. You always get a different flavour of a response when you talk to the rank and file from when you talk to the police chiefs, as you would expect, and they explain what's happening on the ground and what matters to them.
Do you mind if I just ask what the raid was about? Because, you know, that sounds like a very sort of specialised area of the police force, and what's come out in our polling is that...
Oh, no, well, it was a whole team of... yeah.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that, you know, our polling shows that people want to focus on that everyday crime, the phone theft, the burglaries that they feel are just being ignored. So I just want to get an idea of your message to the public who think that these so-called lesser crimes have effectively been decriminalised, because what you're talking about there is raids, highly specialised within the police force. You're not talking about, you know, someone being harassed on the street or having their phone stolen on a Saturday night.
Our absolute focus is on that epidemic of everyday crime and tackling those issues. It is not acceptable that people will get their phone stolen and there isn't a response that they would expect. I've suffered from that. My kids, when they had their phones stolen, you know, these things are enormously traumatic and very real.
Yeah, tell me about that. What was that like as a family, as a victim of crime? What was that process like? Because what we're hearing is it's miserable.
Well, of course, it's a miserable experience. Everybody knows that when you have something stolen from you, it's very scary.
Yeah, but what happens afterwards is even worse for some people.
The response from the police was great. What I think we're not good at is.
Did they get the phones back?
In touch, so I don't know what the outcome was. They didn't get the phones back. I don't know if anybody ended up being convicted. And it's that communication process that I think we need to work on in the police. And to be fair to them, they are super busy because of all the bureaucracy they're dealing with, because of the demand. We have to tilt the balance so that we have more police in our neighbourhoods, they have more time and they're able to respond and keep in touch with victims so that people know what is happening. And, you know, our neighbourhood police, the ones in my community who I spend a huge amount of time with, do a fantastic job, but they get abstracted quite often because they have to do other things because the pressures are
but
so
I just think you've summed it up
policing.
in a nutshell there, haven't you? You know, policing ministers, children get their phones stolen, it was never recovered, you don't know what happened to it, you don't know if anyone was ever caught. And, you know, there it is. That is it in a nutshell. That is what people at home are saying. Look at the state of it. The crime that touches people's lives every day is their bike being nicked, their phone being stolen, their corner shop being raided by criminal gangs, everyday people stealing to support their families. You know, this is the kind of stuff that is touching lives, and, you know, even you are affected by it.
Yeah, I mean, we all are. It's the most important thing, I think, to most of us, to make sure.
Well, what are you going to do about it? Because, as I said, it's, you know, that's what people want you to focus on.
13,000 officers, 100%, and that is completely what we are focused on. We have seen real results and numbers starting to go in the right direction, from things like knife crime, which of course affect people in their communities, through to things like retail crime. And look, I was on a raid, another raid, taking out an entire gang who were stealing phones in the West End of London, and then we arrested the gang that were selling those phones to China. So the real intelligence that we are now getting in terms of phone theft, where we're able to join up all of these individual phone thefts and actually get the criminals who are responsible for this incredibly lucrative process where they sell the phones on to another country. Those are the kinds of interventions that the police are now doing. They have stepped up and are bringing huge results by doing these big operations, which is part of the solution. But our priority, you should know who your local officers are. You should get a response. The response should be timely, should be kept communicated. We're putting the resources in to do that. And we will see by the end of this Parliament that that bears fruit, and people will begin to feel more confident that they will get the response that they deserve from their crimes, which we know is what makes you feel. It's the difference between whether you feel happy in your community or not, is your perception of crime and the experience you have of it yourself. And we should say that we have no tolerance for this.
We know the criminal justice system from start to finish is in crisis, from everyday policing to the court system to prisons. People are saying, you know, has there ever been a better time to be a criminal in Britain? Because even if you are nicked for something, the chances of you getting to court, very long and protracted if you even get there. The chances of you going to prison, even less so, not just because of that system, but by the time you get to sentencing, there is a real push not to send you to prison because the prisons are full.
So, look, there are a huge number of issues that you've highlighted there, and we know we inherited an absolute
Has there ever been a better time to be a criminal?
I spend a lot of time talking with my colleagues. No, absolutely not. We are bearing down on criminals, and the reform will bear fruit, and we are starting to see that in terms of the results that we've got. We are on track to have, by the end of March, 3,000 new extra police on our streets. That will make a big difference, and people will see it. And as the numbers rise, they will begin to see that change as well.
Well, a lot to get into with our home editor. You saw his report at the top of the programme. Jason Farrow, who's here with me in the studio, and joining us from Westminster, his spiritual home, Deputy Political Editor Sam Coates. We couldn't quite coax you away from Westminster, Sam, but we're glad to have your company nevertheless. Sam, let's first start, before we talk about the comments from the policing minister there, the unique insight we've been given. I mean, a lot of this, people watching tonight will have heard anecdotally, but to see it here in black and white as part of an official survey is quite something.
Oh, it's quite remarkable, Sarah-Jane. Look, YouGov have done an incredible piece of public service, really. They've done 3 surveys, 2 of which I didn't even realise were possible, to do a deep dive into the police, actually asking police staff, police officers and ancillary workers what's going on there, and to ask victims of crime as well what they think. These surveys are very, very rare. And I think it's really given us an unusual moment to allow us to stop, pause and take stock of what ministers and the police claim. And it really does bear out. I have to say I found the survey quite bleak reading in some ways, but important reading, which is why we're focusing on it so much today.
Sam, can I ask you about the interaction I had with the policing minister about everyday crime, which is something we're really focusing in on in this survey, the fact that it's something the public and the police are in step on. They don't think enough attention is being paid to it. And the policing minister herself admitting that her family has been a victim of everyday crime. She said that the response was great. In other words, the police picked up the phone. But she said what happens next is not what we're not so good at. And that's investigating crime, solving it.
Look, I thought the exchange was fascinating because what you got there was the policing minister basically admitting that what's happened to an awful lot of people has happened to her too. She couldn't quite go as far as admitting her own frustrations with the process. It's very hard if you're the police minister to rail about your own individual case. I would actually give her a little bit of leeway, some credit for honesty, and then just an acceptance that if you're a policing minister to maybe go on the TV and complain about the police's handling of your own case, I think is a little bit tricky. But I did really feel that you had a policing minister who understood what it was like to do some of the things or go through some of the experiences that a lot of victims. But what's fascinating is that actually, whether you're looking at the victims or the police or indeed ministers, they're all saying the same thing. They're all saying there's an epidemic of everyday crime and it needs to be dealt with. And that epidemic isn't really being resolved with the police. Look at the chart that you've got on your screen at the moment. I want to draw your attention to the 4th bar on that the crimes investigated that led to arrest or charge. So if your crime is investigated, only 7% lead to an arrest or charge. That is a tiny number. And remember, only 2/3 of people report the crime that they were a victim of in the first place. We are talking about absolutely tiny numbers here. What really struck me, though, Sarah-Jane, about your interview with Sarah Jones was that she was very keen to talk about the kinds of things the government are doing that she hoped would be relatable to people at home, more bobbies on the beat, making your local officer more present. But in truth, the big thing that this government is undertaking is an enormous structural reform of the police. It's going to take basically several years, most of the rest of this parliament, breaking up the current way that the system works, reducing the number of individual local forces from 43 down to maybe round about a dozen, to centralise all the specialisms around that are currently distributed around the country. And so there is going to be a lot of change below the surface in order to deliver that goal of better serving and better dealing with the epidemic of everyday crime. So there's a long journey of reform over the next 3 or 4 years that this government is undertaking
a journey that a lot of previous governments have ducked or thought too risky or thought wouldn't deliver the results. So there's big stuff happening in this area, in this sector, because there's an acknowledgement of the problem. The big question is it going to actually deal with it?
Yeah, Sam, and you're right to give credit to the Minister for sort of sharing her own experience, saying she gets it, sharing her frustration about it all as well, and revealing her thoughts and plans to tackle it. Jason, you were in Swindon talking about our findings with people on the street and police as well, and the perception of everyday crime. I'll go back to that key finding from our survey, that the public and the police are really in step when it comes to everyday crime and the lack of focus and action. And it was quite interesting on the streets what you saw. Sort of give us an idea, because not everything could go into that short film you made.
No, it basically just summed up what our survey was finding. The headline figure for me, about 14% of people feeling that lesser crimes like shoplifting wouldn't be investigated, and it's played out in the victims' own experiences as well. What Sam was talking about, most people just being given a crime number, only about 20% actually having it investigated, and 7% ending up with them actually having an arrest. And when I spoke to shopkeepers and people on the street, that was the feeling, that there weren't enough police officers out on the beat, that there were repeat offenders, that even if they actually did get someone arrested, they'd be back, they'd get a slap on the wrist. That was another problem. And I can imagine that's quite disheartening for the police officers themselves as well. So when it comes to those lesser crimes, this feeling, there were some people, most people said they would report it, but there were some people who said they hadn't reported lesser crimes. People who worked in supermarkets, particularly, who I spoke to, saying that the level of shoplifting has gone up. And one of the things this survey looked at was the perceptions of crime. And people are right to think that shoplifting has gone up. It has. And phone theft has gone up. People also think other crimes like house burglaries, knife crime, violent crimes gone up. Those crimes haven't gone up. They've actually reduced. But I think because people are seeing this everyday crime, they get this feeling of being under siege. And so what we saw in Swindon was people setting up WhatsApp groups to try and help each other out in the shops, sharing information, sharing
like the old
faces.
neighbourhood watch, if you remember that.
Yeah, and one of the survey's findings is the police like neighbourhood watches. There's only about only about 3% of them had a negative view of neighbourhood watches. So extraordinary support for that from the police themselves. So people setting up Facebook groups, sharing information about burglars. We heard about all of that in Swindon going on, and the police support that. And the other thing that I found going out with the police officers is they agree with the public that they want to be out there. They feel held back by the bureaucracy of all the paperwork that we've heard about them having to do, going through CCTV, taking witness statements and all this. They're all important, but it feels like they feel there's too much focus on that. They want to be out in the community. OK, Jason, for the moment, thank you. And Sam Coates in Westminster. We'll speak more in a moment. But earlier on, I spoke to Chief Constable Gavin Stevens. He is the chair of the National Police Chiefs Council, about our polling, and I asked him about the public's lack of confidence in police investigating those everyday minor crimes.
The range of challenges that we face, from local shoplifting all the way through to organised international crime gangs involved in child abuse, is enormous. Obviously, what comes to the fore in some of this polling is what people see every day, but policing is responsible for the whole spectrum of it. Now, that's a strong message from the public that they want more concentration on the local issues. We absolutely hear that, but we need to be able to reform for the modern age so we can meet that whole range of threats.
People will agree that you're stretched. The police are saying there aren't enough resources, they want more funding. The public backing the government, funding the police more than any other part of the criminal justice system. But I'll just come back to, as you say, that everyday crime, the crime that touches people's lives every day, every week. Would you agree that the focus has gone from that in policing? You talk about being stretched, you talk about new areas of crime that police have to now cover. Would you agree that police has taken its eye off the ball when it comes to everyday policing?
Well, I think I wouldn't describe it as taking our eye off the ball. I was describing it as making some very difficult...
Being forced to.
to make some very difficult choices about where to allocate resources. And of course, one of the things that we must do day in, day out is listen to concerns of communities and deal with the things that affect them most, and where we get polling results like this at the national level or through local surveys, absolutely we must shift our priorities in response to that.
So you're saying having to make difficult choices was taking resources and attention away from everyday crimes, one of those tough choices, and is that now proving to be the wrong one?
Well, in my experience over 30 years, these things are constantly in flux. There are more requests coming into policing, more community needs that people call us about, contact us online about, come into police stations about, than we could ever really hope to deal with the whole breadth of it. So we always have to make tough choices across policing. The important thing is that we listen, that we seem
are those
to
calls
care.
coming in more? I'm just trying to get to the point, because you know the public have responded to this and they do want answers. So I'm just going to try and dig into that. Are you getting more calls and complaints about these everyday crimes because criminals now feel that they can get away with it? We're hearing from the public that essentially crimes like having your phone or your bike nicked are decriminalised.
Well, the point about people feeling that criminals might be getting away with it is a broader one than policing. The first part of the question about is this a priority for local policing? Absolutely it is now. We're really strong advocates.
But is it on the rise because criminals think they can do it without impunity?
Well, yeah, that's a broader point about the criminal justice system. There have been 2 recent reviews.
Well, you can narrow it down to policing.
Leveson.
Criminals will do it because they think if somebody calls the police, they will not answer if their phone has been snatched from their hand.
No, the response to these issues is improving all the time. The emphasis from policing is on it, but what we also hear from communities is that they want there to be consequences for that. That's why there have also, in addition to the plans for reform to policing, there are plans to reform the broader criminal justice system. We know that Sir Brian Leveson did a really detailed report into how the whole criminal justice service needs to change so that people see the speed of justice. There are huge delays in people waiting for trials in court, so the system needs to work together. One
of the many reasons why it's good to have your contribution to our programme tonight is to put those messages across to the public, answer their concerns. Only 14% of people have confidence in the police investigating so-called minor crimes, some of the ones we've touched on there. Of those victims who didn't report their crime, 47% of them felt that the police wouldn't do anything about it, so why bother? Together, those numbers suggest a serious legitimacy problem around everyday policing. How are you going to change that perception in the public? Not just, talk to them, but make them feel the change. What's going to happen?
There are 2 things, I think, that will make people notice and feel a change about policing, caring about the issues that are affecting them day to day. One is a really good quality relationship at the local level with a neighbourhood policing team that they know how to get in touch with, they feel that are responsive to their local area, but also methods of contact that are easy and work for people and get results. So, I mean, let me give you an example. A force that's adopted new ways to contact people online through chat agents, that live time, a young man who reported the fact that his father was assaulting his mother and was able to get a response without even picking up the phone to the police there to make an arrest. Maybe if it didn't feel safe enough at that moment in time to pick up the phone and call for the police, but could access us through an online service that somebody of that age feels comfortable of using. These new technologies, these new ways of getting police to be responsive to local people's issues are really going to help us earn back confidence as well as the presence in local areas.
Officers, when we talk to them through our work here at Sky News, tell us that the public and the media have got the wrong impression about them, and that came out in their polling as well, that we simply don't understand the nature of policing. What is it we are not getting? What can you tell the public, and indeed us here at Sky News, that would help us understand the role?
Well, policing is an amazing vocation. I love policing, and those are two words that you don't often hear together, police and love. But the people that come into policing come in it with a real sense of vocation, in wanting to do their bit to create a world that is that little bit safer and feels that little bit safer as well. And one of the things that we've observed in recent times is that sometimes we see, rather than coming to the aid of colleagues who are in those difficult positions, we see people maybe standing by, filming on their phones, criticising, calling to account, instead of stepping in to do their bit and help. And that's tough for people when their every move is being scrutinised. I mean, could you imagine in the job that you're doing now, or anybody watching this programme, if there was somebody over your shoulder pointing a phone in your face whilst you're in the middle of a really difficult situation or scenario? That's a tough place to be. We ask extraordinary things of our colleagues, and they do amazing work.
Well, our home editor, Jason Farrell, is still in the studio with me, listening to that interview. And Jason, so much to pull out from that interview, but a couple of things that you were particularly interested in, this modern way of policing, a couple of which was picked up on there. Social media, making police jobs harder, and reporting crimes online. There are not many local police stations anymore, let's face it. So you have to go to your computer to fill out a form, which for many people isn't a satisfactory way to have an interaction with the police.
A lot of people feel like the nucleus of the police station and their contact with police has shifted, and it's moved away from them. And this has been physically represented by the closing down of hundreds of police stations in the last decade or so. And you know, if you've lost that police station in your community, someone actually wrote to me today to say they'd written to the Home Secretary about this because they pay, he's worked out how much their community pays, which he reckoned was about £2 million. He said, we've got no police officers in my town because we've got no police station. That isn't completely accurate because there are 5 police officers assigned to that town, but whether they're there or not the whole time, you can see where they get. So this idea that you fill in the form now online and you do everything online, people don't want to see that. They do want to see the bobbies on the beat. And another guy, a former police officer, got in touch with me to say that there is this move away from localised policing, and it has, you know, that it's kind of...
But the policing minister said that they're trying to go back to that.
Well, are they? Because policing is becoming more specialised. And in some ways it has to. Like, we need to focus more on violence against women and girls and things like that. Police officers need those specialisms. Yes, they're getting up more community officers, but those come and go. Those initiatives come and go. Yeah. But moving actual physical police stations, you understand why they've done it, because they say, well, these buildings are getting old, or they're no longer any use, or, you know, we can actually invest the money in police officers themselves and spend more on policing. And it's the same with this whole thing around actually, you know, having fewer forces, streamlining, more investment, working together. But people, again, just feel like this pulling back. It's interesting, actually, in this survey, the police have been asked for the first time that I've heard of about whether they support this massive reconstruction of the police from 43 forces to
policing.
And reducing the number of forces. And actually, the result is literally 50-50. Okay. So it's very interesting.
Something else that was picked up on there in my interview with the Chief Constable of the NPCC is this overlooking of everyday crime. And I keep coming back to it because that's what our survey has shown us, that people at home watching tonight want taken more seriously. And the police officer you spoke to in Swindon, I wrote down a couple of his quotes. We take all crime seriously, no crime too small. But the truth of the matter is the capacity isn't there. And like you said, with more specialism policing, more modern-day policing, as the gentleman from the NPCC put it, you know, they can't do it all. They cannot do it all. That is the truth of the matter. And something's got to give.
And there's another aspect to that, which is actually, when you look at the big raids, like the drug raids, and you were talking to the minister about going on big raids and taking out the organised criminals, when you speak to Vince down in his shop in Swindon, he's saying that the problem is people are robbing my shop because of their drug addiction. So actually, the idea of, you know, drug fueling a lot of crimes, and a lot of police officers I've spoken to, be it domestic violence or theft, phone theft, shoplifting, fuelled by drugs. So how are you going to tackle that? You're going to go after each individual criminal, or do you go for big organised events like cracking down on county lines drug dealers, for example? So there is some logic in going for the big guys and focusing on that, because that should trickle down to smaller crimes. But the problem is that a lot of people feel, and it's played out in these figures and in this survey, that what it's left is a feeling of neglect around those smaller, lesser crimes, which people do want to see investigated.
I'm going to bring in our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates. Sam, I want to talk about police culture, because that is something we talk a lot about on this programme. It is widely debated, it is controversial, and this survey showing us what police officers actually think about the culture within the police. From outside the police looking in, it can be called toxic. But if you speak to police officers, it seems, it's very much, well, there's not actually that much to see here.
Look, it's absolutely fascinating. If you talk to the police and ask them what's the problem, they say it's underfunding, understaffing. Although the truth, Sarah-Jane, is that actually we're pretty much just off a 20-year high in the number of full-time equivalent police officers. So actual police numbers aren't the issue. If you look in depth at what the police say the issue is, fairly quickly you get to this idea that rank-and-file police officers and police staff blame senior officers for not doing their jobs well. If you then start to delve even deeper than that into cultural questions, you find out that 51% of people who work in the police as police officers or staff have experienced or seen bullying. 42% say they have experienced or seen sexism or misogyny. And twice as many female police officers think sexism as a problem as male. But you just touched on it. Do they recognise this? Do they recognise an issue here? The answer, actually, Sarah-Jane, is no. Because if we look at a different finding, we asked, do you think that there's a real problem with offensive attitudes and language? 15%, as opposed to the 55% who think, and you can see it on the screen now, officers are being persecuted for banter or humour. So what I think you get, if you look into this polling, is a sense amongst rank-and-file police officers that so many different forces are against them. They don't have the numbers, the strength. People are picking on them, sort of calling them out, they think unnecessarily harshly, that there isn't an issue within the police to deal with. But when you draw it back into political terms, sort of where I come at this argument, and the question is sort of where does the problem lie? It's quite stark. There are the numbers, but there are a lot of problems below the sort of surface of the police that may not be doing a service to the victims. Remember, very small numbers of them feel that if their crime is investigated and there is a result, there isn't an arrest, a charge or a resolution.
Sam, Jason, thank you for the moment. More stark findings from the poll come from those who need police the most, victims of crime. Many unhappy with how officers handled their cases, while a lack of faith in police means many crimes are going unreported. According to the poll, victims who have reported a crime, 40% were satisfied with how police handled it, while 50% were dissatisfied. And for victims who did not report a crime, 47% say it was because they felt as though it wouldn't be investigated. Earlier today, I spoke to Andrea Simon, the new Victims Commissioner for London, who said that she's starting in that role at a watershed moment.
We are currently in a very big moment when it comes to reform of the criminal justice system. We've had the government introduce reforms to the court process in a bill that's currently before Parliament. This presents a really important moment to try and deal with some of the really pressing issues that victims face when they report crime to the police and they have to go through the process. One of those being very, very long waits for justice. And as the Victims Commissioner for London, I'm concerned that Crown Courts are now listing cases well into 2030, and expecting victims to stay engaged with the process for that long is it's not fair. And it's causing lots of victims to disengage from the system altogether.
Andrea, it's worth reminding people watching this interview what your remit is as Victims Commissioner for London. What kind of victims do you look after and represent? Does it tend to be the victims at the most serious end of the scale, major crimes?
I'm concerned about improving the systems and the processes for all victims. So many of the things that will impact you if you report what's considered maybe a lower level crime or a more serious crime will be the things I've set out about the service the police provide. So if I can go to those agencies, I can highlight different ways that victims are being failed, and they improve their standards and their processes, then I hope that that will have an impact across London for all victims and their engagement with the police.
Yeah, I mean, what we found as part of our information gathering, as part of our polling, is that there is an enormous gap in confidence between the police dealing with major crime and so-called minor, lesser crimes. It's the everyday crime the general public seem to be concerned about, because that's what touches most people's lives. Who acts for them? That's you, then.
I'm hoping that what I can do is going to make an improvement in how police treat everyone that they come into contact with. And I understand that what could be considered lower level, things like antisocial behaviour and other crimes in communities have massive impacts on people's lives. But I'm also concerned that people's perception of fairness in their treatment and the justice that they're seeking is not out of their reach, and that then there must be more done to stop these barriers in accessing justice that currently exist, whether that's the time people have to wait or the treatment they receive when they do reports. More must be done to address those issues.
Yeah, 42% of police officers say they have experienced or seen sexism or misogyny at work. 51% say they have experienced or seen bullying, yet only 19% of men in the police think sexism and misogyny in the police is a big deal. 42% of women in the police think it is. What are your thoughts on that?
I think the culture of policing is absolutely vital to improving both policing performance, but also in driving up trust and confidence and in getting victims to come forward and report in the first place. If that culture doesn't improve, and if we don't see the police reckoning with the realities that we know are issues for policing, we're 3 years on from Baroness Casey's report about the Metropolitan Police Service, which found institutional racism, homophobia and sexism was an issue, then I think we'll struggle to rebuild the trust and confidence that policing has lost amongst the public because of major scandals around police-perpetrated abuse and the cases of Sarah Everard's murder by serving a Metropolitan Police officer. So it is, I think, a problem with maybe the police's perception of the issues within the force itself that we need to be looking at further.
Yeah, you say it's a struggle. I mean, does that word cover it? It seems nigh on impossible to change a culture if the people within it, the everyday people who are face-to-face with victims, out there sorting out the everyday crimes, just don't recognise it, just don't get it.
Yeah, I think there's been some improvement in the Met trying to clean up the force, trying to get rid of officers whose behaviour actions are either criminal or they are guilty of some kind of misconduct. But it's going to take longer, I think, to really change that culture across the whole of the police service.
Well, let's get into those concerns around cultural issues within policing, with only 15% of staff believing that there's a real problem. That's despite 42% having seen or experiencing sexism or misogyny and 51% having seen or experienced bullying. Those statistics are stark. Here with me in the studio, gender equality campaigner Patsy Stevenson. Good to see you, Patsy. And Jason is here as well. I mean, let's get straight to it, Patsy. Police officers, serving police officers, don't seem to realise that there is a problem.
I think that's one of the main issues. I think when campaigners say, they talk a lot about accountability and understanding the systemic abuse. Like, it's one thing for police to go, yeah, there's systemic abuse and we're going to tackle it, but it's another thing to understand it and lower the defences. It's often, you know, that happens a lot when you're, like, talking to men, for example, and they're like, well, not all men, there's a defensiveness. If we just bring that down and say, OK, yeah, we aren't talking about all men, but let's actually talk about what we're talking about, where we've got the statistics that this is happening quite often, so what we're going to do to fix it, you know?
Jason, what are the police doing to fix it? Because there always seems to be a lot of focus on the Met.
Yeah.
But what is happening in the Met is symptomatic of what is happening within police forces nationwide. So what are police publicly saying they're going to do to change the culture, and how much harder is that made by the polling that suggests that those working within it don't actually think there's something to do?
Well, if you speak, obviously, if you speak to Mark Rowley, and he has been the one who's under, especially after the Casey review, which did find that it was institutional racism, homophobia, and sexism in the force. And OK, you could say it's not fair to say just because it's in the Met that it's necessarily in Wiltshire or Hampshire, or but I think that we've been to a number of forces around the country where we've spoken to female police officers, for example, who have suffered extreme, sexual issues with other police officers.
And you also speak to victims of crime, they're dealing with.
And this is the other aspect, which also
well.
came out of the Casey review, that if there is that attitude, then how are they reporting things like rape, things like sexual offences? And often they're not dealing with those crimes in the way that they should, as we've discussed. And they are trying to create more. So when it comes to that, they're trying to create more specialist-focused units that understand these crimes better and know how to speak to victims and listen to them and spot the signs. And also, we've heard from Matt Rowley talking about rooting out people, having a zero-tolerance policy. There are cases going through the IOPC and other disciplinary hearings where I've seen them go through where people are being kicked out of the force for these issues. But there's always more that they can do, and I think it's right that we shouldn't just focus on the Met, because, as I say, we've seen this in forces around the country where there are problems. But you also speak to the rank and file officers, and we're obviously speaking to a female police officer in Swindon, PC Thapper, who said she personally hadn't experienced it. And if she hasn't experienced it, but she's not saying it isn't happening, she just hasn't personally experienced it herself. And the male officer there who we spoke to, when we asked him about this, he felt that it was improving. And I think there's officers I've spoken to do feel that the culture is improving, and I think, you have to hear it from them, and we don't know necessarily how bad it is in other forces outside of them.
I mean, there is an acceptance, isn't there, Patsy, that public institutions and organisations are going to be a reflection of society in some capacity. However, with the police, there is a higher standard. You're meant to be the best of the best. You're meant to uphold the rules. You're meant to be, there should be no place for sexism, misogyny, racism, homophobia. But, that is clearly not happening. We talk about improved vetting, different recruitment policies coming in, retrospective vetting to get rid of those people that are causing the problem. But that's going to take time. You're being promised that by the top police chiefs. Do you have faith that it will happen, even if it does take longer than we would like?
No, unfortunately. When we say, obviously you say in society we have misogyny, racism, homophobia, and it is exacerbated in systems like the police. What's worrying is that they have a warrant card, they have a uniform where they can basically tell people what to do, and people are scared, and they will be scared because of the history of policing and police brutality. And I think that, when we look at change, it has been time and time again for decades. It's been lip service. It's been, I remember after the vigil, because Cressida Dick was in charge at that time, and she resigned, and I think Priti Patel resigned as well. It was everyone supposedly at the top
accountability.
Resigned, this is what accountability looks like, and it was a lot of lip service around we will change and reform will happen. It's been 5 years on, like almost to the day, and I've not seen any change. I actually go to demos quite often, and I've seen police acting appallingly, especially to protesters, which doesn't make a lot of sense, because when you've got actual crimes happening, like violent crimes sometimes, we don't see a lot of accountability there and justice. But when it comes to protesters, this is just from my perspective and campaigners I know, often they aren't doing much, but the police are there quite aggressively.
OK. I want to bring you the responses from Gavin Stevens from the NPCC and the Policing Minister, Sarah Jones, because I put our findings about police culture to them. This is what they have to say.
There is definitely a problem with misogyny and racism within policing. Policing has around 250,000 people work in this profession. We know that we get all sections of society, but equally we know that our standards of recruitment, selection and vetting need to be higher, and we need to root this out.
There have been some horrific cases that bring down the rest of our police force, and they tear their hair out and say, look, we want to show the best, not the worst, but we will make sure the systems are in place so that we get the right people going into policing, that we are vetting them throughout their career to make sure anything that happens while they're in policing is discovered and rooted out and dealt with, and that we are as clear as we can be about very high expectations for the standards that we expect in policing, because they have unique powers. And we must respond to that by making sure we have the very best people in policing.
Patsy, the will is there to change, but as our polling suggests, it's problematic because, serving frontline officers don't seem to think there is a problem. A lot of them thinking they're getting punished for just banter. Just out of interest, given your dealings with the Metropolitan Police and what you do, what you campaign for, have you ever been invited in by the Met Police for education purposes to have a dialogue to help change culture? Because that's essentially something else you're really passionate about. Is you ever had that invitation?
Never. Not once. The only one time I've spoken to anyone from the force was we accidentally met, me and Mark Rowley, accidentally met at an event for victims. And even then, the way he spoke to me, to be honest, it felt unnatural. It felt strange, like he asked me to do him a favour. What they're doing now is they're rooting out and vetting officers that are already in the force and getting them out. He was asking me to be loud about it and help with that. But I've never been in contact with them. We've never spoken.
Would you like to go in and speak to them?
I think that'd be interesting. I think that they're probably, that their view of me is probably different to how I would be. I'm quite an open person. I know I sound like I'm very radical a lot of the time, but what I care about is survivors. What I care about is people. And if they care about the same thing, then why would we not converse about making that better?
We have heard from the Met saying we regularly draw on the insight of independent advisory groups and subject matter experts whose contributions are instrumental in shaping our ongoing commitment. We recognise that given the scale of the sector, we cannot reach every organisation or individual campaign as often as we would wish. But Patsy, that sounds like an open invitation to me. Patsy and Jason, thank you so much. We've heard from a range of voices about how to tackle the problems in policing. The policing minister telling us the public is right to criticise the response to everyday crime, and one of the country's most senior policing officers admitting the resources have been moved elsewhere. A difficult choice that is not popular with the public or the police. What is clear is that money alone will not change the perception that the police can't deal with crimes deemed less serious. But try telling someone whose phone was snatched out of their hand that it wasn't serious, or the shopkeeper who keeps being targeted by the same shoplifters time and time again. Police officers need the public's trust to do their job, but that trust is damaged. For some victims, it has simply gone, and the government and senior officers have a real job on their hands to get it back. Well, that's all from the UK tonight. Thank you for watching. Up next, it's The World. We'll see you on Monday.